Okay, firstly, good afternoon, everybody, and I hope you're all doing well. In challenging times, you've probably seen that nationally the pandemic is actually probably getting worse. So while we've got a little bit of freedom, not talking on screen, but while we can get on about enjoy it, because I suspect on Friday there'll be a big announcement. Yeah, I don't know if you've been following the news, but I was in a briefing yesterday with Boris Johnson, and he was very, very complimentary of local authorities. And what that means is he's going to ask local authorities to do a lot more work to actually manage and control the virus. So let's see what happens. But I suspect that there's going to be some tough measures that are going to come down nationally. What that means, I don't know. We'll just wait and see. But anyway, I think the meeting's in two parts. We've got public part of the agenda, and you've got the agenda circulated. And there's a private session that we'll go into, which we'll be talking about. We've got somebody who's actually come and talk about unconscious bias. And actually, it's quite a timely time to actually have that, because I myself have got a lot of unconscious biasness. So I'm not immune. So I'll look forward to that. I'll probably learn a lot as well. But it's timely because of what's taken place internationally on the back of the Black Lives Matter movement, and we see things happening in America. The militias are now taking control of streets in America, and from both from a white community and a black community, and it's really, really frightening. And it shows that the leadership really needs to get a grip of the situation to actually make sure people come together. We don't want a world that's divided. We've got enough problems as it is. Let's hope that we whatever work we do through this panel brings people together. Just a few ground rules, I'm sure you know, but if you want to talk, just raise your hands. If I miss anything, James, just prompt me. Just butt in, because I can only do two things. I'm a man, so I can only do one thing at a time. So just and if I don't miss you, right, yeah, just wave your hand, and I'll probably catch you. In terms of the panel, we've got two new members that have joined the panel from the Let Board. Firstly, it's Khalid Tiari and Cameron Rashid. So welcome on board. We want people to come on this board. I want this board to be the board to be on. The board that makes a difference, the board that pioneers and is a cutting edge of new ideas and policies that bring people together. So that's just a quick update regarding two new board members. Delivery progress, the panel is building on the role agreed last meeting, and hopefully we'll continue to work on the good work that we've been delivering. And I don't know if I raised this last time, but the focus of this panel is going to change, because we're not really a delivery board. We don't have a pot of money and here you are and go off. We're more of a touchy-feely board. But again, right, yeah, I didn't really understand what that meant. So last Let Board meeting, one before, I can't remember. But anyway, what we said was that this board really is a board where it cuts across the whole agendas, and what we do is going to be so critical in terms of addressing the big issues. On the pandemic, we've realised that the inequalities that exist have always been there. But the pandemics has actually sort of magnified that and brought that out in focus, because you see that the most deprived communities have actually had it worse, and you're also seeing a generation of people, citizens, who actually had to go through austerity 10 years ago, and they're actually facing it again. So that's a double whammy, and we all seen a cohort of young people that are coming forward with prospects of employment and learning skills, probably at an all-time high. So my heart goes out to them. I've got an 18-year-old. Luckily, she's doing A levels, but sometimes I think, God Almighty, right? Yeah, I'm probably one of the lucky ones. But what about the hundreds and thousands of other young people who are doing the 16 plus exams and A levels and GCSEs and all the other stuff? So we have to do something for them to make sure that there's a better future for them. Anyway, I can carry on, but I won't carry on. We've got a meeting to get through. I've got apologies of absence from Councillor Cooper, Councillor Pattison, Jackie Gedman, she's the chief executive of Kirklees, who oversees this piece of work. She's having IT problems, so she might join us. But if she does, great stuff. But I know that she's had big problems with IT connectivity. James, has any more apologies come in since last time we spoke? Just nod your head or no. Okay. Thanks.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, we have had further apologies from Rob
yes.
Cameron Rashid and Helen Featherstone.
Right. Okay. Thank you. We'll be making all that. So James, she's on the ball, which is good. Well done, Alia. We thought that was it, but thank you very much for that. Item 2, any declaration of pecuniary interest? If you do have any, you suddenly remember, just let Alia or James or one of the staff know, so we can record it just for due diligence purposes. Item 3, exclusion of the public. All the items they're discussing are in the public domain. We'll go into a private session, which I've talked about earlier, which is just probably an awareness sort of training session. Item 4, minutes of meeting on the 15th of June. Are they a correct record? Yes, thank you. James, is there anything that's coming out from the meeting that we need to action? I don't think there is. Alia, is there anything that's coming out from the meeting that we need to, that's not on the agenda? No? Okay. Item, members, is any matters that arising that you want to raise in the minutes? No? Okay, thank you very much. Item 5, COVID-19 impact and recovery update. This is a paper that, James, are you going to present, or is it Alan? Alan, I think, is going to present this, isn't he? Alan, are you there?
Chair, it looks like Alan's hasn't been able to make it, so I'll take it if that's okay.
Yes, that's fine. Okay, over to you.
So this is a really quick update for the panel following some previous discussions, just so that we kind of formally record where we're up to on economic recovery, and the role that the panel has had in that. The economic recovery plan, which has been worked on by the Economic Recovery Board, including which we have some members on here, a member of that board. I see Kate nodding, and we're working on the plan. And Yanis is here as well. Hi, Yanis. That plan has now been adopted, has been discussed a couple of times at the Combined Authority and LEP Board, and has been adopted, and focuses around 3 priorities around business, jobs and resilient businesses, employment skills, and infrastructure, and has got, as per our previous discussions, has got inclusive growth as well as clean growth running through it as cross-cutting themes embedded in those priorities within the plan. The proposals that we've now submitted to government, we've written to the leaders, have written to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, sum to £1.4 billion, of which 750 million are included in 4 West Yorkshire propositions around key strengths and opportunities in West Yorkshire, and that's around health tech, and the cluster of businesses that and focus that we have across our universities on, and the key, the unique input that we can give to that agenda in this region, around the need to increase entrepreneurship, and that particularly recognises the fact that through a period of economic disruption, we typically see large amounts of startup activity as talented people lose their current positions and perhaps make the decision to set up their own businesses. And so it's critical that we kind of harness that potential across the region. There's a proposal about digital in its broadest sense, addressing the key challenges as well as opportunities that already existed around the region, but also are kind of new challenges and opportunities coming out of the COVID-19 crisis. So that covers both digital infrastructure as well as the supporting digital skills that will be needed to fully make the most of that digital infrastructure. And then finally, a proposition around a net zero carbon economy and the key opportunities there in terms of jobs as we transition to a low carbon economy, and making sure that we harness those. So that's where we are on the plan. With the next steps, apart from continuing to lobby the government, the plan will be at the centre of the submission that the Combined Authority makes to the Comprehensive Spending Review, which needs to be in by the end of by next week, in fact. So that'll be at the centre of that. We will continue to lobby government with our partners where we have shared interests. The next thing the Recovery Board are working on, their meeting tomorrow, they are considering a fifth proposition around the importance of culture and creative industries for West Yorkshire, and that is a collaborative piece that we've done with all of the districts, where the cultural leads in each of the 5 local authorities have come together and identified the needs, both short, medium and long term, for that sector and the opportunities and that culture and the creative industries bring to the economy and to communities. So that's the next thing to come from the plan. I think that's all I was going to say, Chair, unless there's any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions, comments, observations? I've got Dr. Peter O'Brien and then Councillor Jane Scullion and then Cal Oxford. Brian, for Peter.
Thanks very much, Chair. Just a question, Ian. The summary of the economic recovery plan that's been produced. There's a reference in that document to inclusive growth and the economic recovery plan, and it talks about ensuring well-being, and it says that this economic recovery plan will provide a key link to the health recovery plan for West Yorkshire. Where's the health recovery plan? Is somebody developing a health recovery plan for West Yorkshire?
So we've got Rob Webster on the recovery board, and perhaps I could bring Yanish in, who's here for Rob, just now about what's happening on the health side. If that's okay, Yanish.
Yeah, happy to. So I think the reference to a health recovery plan is maybe slightly too singular. That there's probably a much wider set of health recovery plans that are constantly changing in response to the emerging priorities and the kind of different phases of the pandemic. So the NHS letters, for example, have guided the different phases of health recovery. I don't think there's a single kind of constant health recovery plan as such, but as Ian said, Rob and I are the sort of link between the health world and the economic recovery plan. We're also trying to build much stronger links between aspects of the economic recovery plan and particular aspects of our health system plans. So, for example, you'll see mention of the health and care workforce within the economic recovery plan, and we're trying to tie that together at the moment. So I hope that answers some of that question, Peter.
Thank you. Jane?
Yes, I should say, following Dr. Peter O'Brien, I should say I'm Councillor Dr. Jane Scullion, having got my PhD late in life. So that's
Dr. Jane.
I got to plug
I don't know.
I never use it on aeroplanes for fear of being asked to give medical help to anyone who's taken poorly. But I think I've just wanted to comment that I think the distinction between a well-being plan and a health plan is important, because I think there is a danger as we live through the months with COVID-19 of more and more of a focus on health. And actually we have to keep a focus on well-being and pay and good work and all of the other things that we work on in this panel. And the second thing was just a comment. I'm really pleased to see further focus being given on the cultural aspects, really. I think culture in West Yorkshire, cultural activities, using a very wide definition, will actually be very important in terms of particularly young people and people who are working in often very marginalised jobs and have been really affected by COVID. Actually, their contribution to the economy and the recovery is really important. So I'm really pleased to see that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Ian, do you want to respond, or are you okay?
The only thing James just maybe realised I probably should have said in my introductory comments was, the work that this panel has done on the inclusive growth framework in particular is embedded and at the heart of the plan. So through the process of producing this plan, all the things that this panel has talked about, into like as Councillor Scully says, that they focus on good work and so on, is in there in the plan. So it's given us another opportunity to further the agenda that this panel's been discussing for a while now.
Thanks, Carl. Is it Dr. Carl Oxford? Are you going to surprise me as well? Have you got a doctorate in something as well?
I've just self-appointed myself and getting a badge drawn up right now, Councillor Shebbeare. So,
right, okay, Carl. Right.
Just to be honest, just following on from Councillor Scullion, really the culture and creative industry is a massive opportunity for our region. So I'm checking, will we get sight of the draft segment before it goes any further and formalised?
Very, very happy to share it. We'll have the discussion at Recovery Board tomorrow. We've pulled it together at pace, but again, based on some work that was ongoing at time, but we've accelerated it hugely. So we're just checking that we haven't missed out a load of or made some mistakes. So we'll discuss it with Recovery Board tomorrow, and after that, very happy to share it with the panel. And if you want a discussion, the status of the recovery plan in general, in Councillor Hinchcliffe's words, is that she thinks it will always be draft because of the changing nature of the crisis. So if at any point this panel wants a discussion on any elements of the recovery plan, that is, we are able to take that on board.
So just one more, just to check, Councillor Pando. So will the culture and creative industries element also be part of a submission for the CSR ask?
We will certainly be flagging that it is. It depends how the discussion goes at Recovery Board, but we will certainly be flagging that it is on its way. We just might not be able to have firm numbers against it yet. So we're drawing up packages about all the different elements across that that our cultural partners want to see in there, but we need to put some numbers against them to get it into to CSR. But we'll certainly be flagging that it's on its way and will form part of our future asks.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, is there any more? I can't see anybody else putting their hands up. Just to provide you with an overview of in terms of what I'm getting up to, because
Chair, I think Professor Towns Andrews.
Oh, sorry. Liz.
Hi.
Liz, sorry.
I didn't put my virtual hand up. I'm sorry, and
I can't even see where the virtual hand is.
And no need for the prof title either.
Right, Liz, over to you. Sorry.
I'm like everybody else. I'm delighted to see the idea of the fifth stream coming in with the creative industries, because it's really timely, because I had a meeting this morning with Rochelle Schuster, and we were looking at the second stream, which is really the increase of the entrepreneurship and innovation. And both Rochelle and Rochelle has expertise from the Design Council in the past, and I said to her, what we really ought to be trying to do in the region would be really to bring, because Calderdale in particular has got a huge LQ number for creative industries. It's 2 point something, it's massive. And what I think we ought to be doing creatively somehow, and we're going to have a go at it through the existing programs that we're running, is to bring the manufacturing sector, the traditional manufacturing sector, alongside the creative industries, to bring them together, because that's where innovation and new approaches will start to work. So to have that fifth stream in, from my perspective, from an innovation point of view, it's really strong, and it's an asset that can be played into the other dimensions of the region. So it's really good from my perspective.
Thank you. If it's okay, Liz, I'll share some relevant parts of the text with you specifically on that, because there's a section in there about entrepreneurship for creatives. So it'd be good to get your input.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Is there anybody else? No, Ian. Is anybody else that I'm missing? No. Very quickly, I'll just let you know from my point of view how this all fits in. The economic recovery plan that the Combined Authority is developing is not the only plan. You've also got to understand that each local authority, that part of the LEP and the Combined Authority, are developing their own individual plans, and that will feed into, complement, add value to the overall structure and overall way forward. We'll do things slightly differently, right, in terms of how everything complements adds up together. The other thing that Ian mentioned is the comprehensive spending review. The work I'm on the LGA executive, and the work we do at the LGA executive is now sort of like stepping up a year, because although there won't be any cuts, I suspect, but there will be a big impact on local authorities and local services in terms of the amount of money that we have to spend and will continue to spend on COVID-19. And we are conscious that if the settlement figure is, say, £7 billion extra to local government, then we already know that there's £4 billion of that which is actually being highlighted by the LGA on a cross-party basis, that actually is money that we need now. So the real figure in real terms will be 3 billion. So basically the message from LGA is there might be no cuts, but there's a huge impact on regarding COVID-19. So James Jamieson, who's the Conservative chair of the LGA, is really, really good. And what we've asked him to do is actually be more aggressive in terms of fighting the case of local government, because this is local government presenting the case to central government to actually say this is what the issues are, and you'll see in the next few days and weeks that the pressures are even worse than what we actually anticipated. Hence, the government's actually looking at a different tact in terms of how they're actually going to address the pandemic. You also know that devolution is actually on the horizon. All local authorities have now actually had their AGMs, and we're now through the first hurdle. The next hurdle will be November, where the order will start to be drawn up, and that will add more money into the local infrastructure, local economy, in terms of the Combined Authority with the Mayor, bringing in £1.8 billion plus of investment, and that'll all go towards developing a robust recovery, not just at the Combined Authority, but across the region as well. Health and well-being, interesting points that you've raised, but there's also another agenda at play here, which we know about, which is the economic agenda. Because at the moment, right, on the one hand, the government, quite rightly, is saying you need to stay safe, you need to protect the NHS and save lives. At the same time, we know that industry, business, the private sector, we need to keep on nurturing it and feeding it to make sure that the economy doesn't get any worse than what it is. And that's where the dilemma is, I think, and it doesn't matter which government is in power, it is extremely difficult. And on the back of that, the last point you mentioned about creative industries, the discussion I was having with the Secretary of State and Boris yesterday was, this is the contrast between livelihood and lifestyles. Now, I could go and probably survive and carry on with a few lifestyle choices. But if my livelihood impacted, then lifestyle goes out the window. And that's where I think the government is going to make some announcements in terms of, which priority they see. And unfortunately, the stuff that improves lifestyles will actually, again, take a backseater. But there may be some concessions that are made there. The things that keep livelihoods intact, will probably take more of a priority. But it'll be interesting to see how that develops. I just thought I'd share something with you, right, in terms of that's happening at a national level, which impacts at a local level. Anyway, we'll move on to the next item, which is the role of the third sector. Is it James? James, are you going to introduce this item and talk through it, and then we'll take some questions?
Happy to, Chair. Yes, I'm conscious of time.
Sorry, time.
Not at all. The paper notes the really significance of the third sector in supporting and protecting our most disadvantaged communities, especially in recent months. So the economic recovery plan referred to earlier recognises that crucial role, and also proposes that the sector itself should be supported to play a central role in delivering an inclusive economic recovery. So this paper proposes starting off a piece of work which will give the panel three things: a better understanding about the nature of the sector itself, because it's not very robust at the moment, a better understanding about what it can add to social and economic growth, and what support as a sector it will need going forwards. The proposed scope for that piece of work is shown at Appendix A, so I'd refer members to that. And I suppose I'd flag that clearly there is activity happening in this space by a range of other partners that we're aware of: locality, the health system, others, and we obviously want to add value to that and not cut across it. So it's proposed at 2.13 that the work set out in Annex A is steered by a task and finish group, which comprises a select group of panel members and others, including those running third sector organisations, all to be agreed after this meeting, I think, by the chair. So just to steer the members to the recommendations, it's really to recognise the positive role, really positive and instrumental role the third sector's played during the pandemic, and to comment on the proposals as set out in the appendix and at 2.13. And I'll pause at that point.
Okay, so task and finish group, that's an outcome from this report. That's what we're looking at, yes? James? Yeah.
Exactly,
right.
Chair.
Right, okay. That'd be good, right? Yeah, that we can actually get something moving. Yanish, you got your hand up. I saw that,
Chair.
you were like this. Can you see my hand? Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. It's just a brief comment. I don't know if you're linked into this, James, but we've got a programme called Harnessing the Power of Communities within the Health and Care Partnership, which has just been doing a survey of the resilience of the VCS sector, kind of following the pandemic. So if you are connected to that, that's great. And if you're not, I'm happy to do an introduction. It may well inform some of this work.
Kate?
Thanks, Councillor Banda. Yeah, further to Yanish's point, I linked James into that alongside other colleagues yesterday, and it's absolutely relevant. I think what's very, very useful though for us to bear in mind is that particular study is with a particular outcome, and what we have to be careful of is burdening third sector organisations with too many requests for surveys and support. So the more we can feed in existing data into James and the team, I would wholeheartedly encourage us all to do, so that there isn't that sort of endless asking the same sort of questions, but in a slightly different way with a slightly different reasoning behind it. That all said, I would like to support wholeheartedly the proposition that there is some kind of opportunity here, really, to examine the scale and nature of the work of the community sector across the sub-region, because in terms of my day job and in terms of anecdotal evidence, it's clear that it's a very strong and innovative sector, but actually having that measured and properly assessed in a way that is comparable to other sectors, I think will do us all a lot of good in terms of understanding the role, the contribution, and also the opportunity for further closer aligned partnership across sectors. I think will be really, really valuable going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Hey, anybody else? Cal?
Thank you, Chair. Just another key point following on from Kate, and this is a key. Well, to be honest, in terms of the sector, and I think it's very timely. And thank you, James. I think the task and finish suggestion is couldn't happen any sooner. And you mentioned locality, but there's a lot of investment going into the third sector nationally. And I think if we could construct, you know, a kind of smart approach to the third sector's contribution to the wider stakeholder matrix, then we would be able to capture a lot of that investment and utilize it in a way that's, you know, produces even more than the sum of its parts, if you like. So just to make that point, you know, it's a really timely opportunity for us to get some innovative thinking, as Kate's mentioned, into that role of the third sector, but also to recognize that a key and essential part of that audit and look into the third sector is to look at a SWOT within the sector, because even in the good days, the sector was under-resourced, but being asked to play a massive, massive role. So we just really need to kind of be clear about what expectations we have of the sector with the resources that go into it. But and that's the point I'd really like to make in terms of generally whether it links in with the economic recovery or whether it links in with the strategic economic framework. And that is the fact that the third sector has an advantage in playing that role of bringing cohesion. You mentioned yourself, Chair, about this is not the time for society to divide, but to come together to fight that common enemy. Well, unfortunately, there are rising, and this is anecdotal, but I am confident we will get some empirical data on this as well, that unfortunately our communities are separating at a rapid rate. There's rising intolerance and social tensions, and there's a significant blame game going on regarding the increase in COVID-19 infections. I think I sent you the other day, Chair, a BBC4 radio documentary led by Dr. Fawzia Hayat that looked at, you know, some of the resentment and fear and mistrust arising at the lockdown in Bradford the night before Eid. So I just want to, and I know that, you know, the LEP agenda is significantly economic, but there are some social aspects that can affect our economy. So we just need to not wait until our society fractures and then we get directives from central government and then we start to close the gate after the horse is bolted. I think there's an opportunity for us to consider the role of the third sector now in helping with community cohesion.
Yeah, and yeah, you're absolutely right. Just to reassure you, Carl, the role of the LEP is economic, you're right, but the conversations that have taken place at the LEP board with Roger's really fully behind this agenda. He completely gets it. Hence, when we change the focus in terms of how this group can be more effective, he was fully behind it. And one thing that this pandemic has brought out is the good in people. Because remember, the private sector completely shut down, and that's where the voluntary community sector and the faith sector and people basically came out and did marvelous work up and down the country. And I can't thank you enough. You know, I saw really good examples in Kirklees, really good examples in Calderdale, in Bradford, in Wakefield, in York. You know, up and down the country, right? You know, it was really great. So, although I understand and accept what you're saying, but having said that, there are a lot of good people out there, Carl, and that's where we need to nurture their goodwill. You know, in terms of, if you see the statistics in terms of how the virus is spreading, it's no longer in them areas like Bradford and Oldham, and you know, the areas that we would have actually wrongly marginalised. This is showing now that it's actually going into places like Selby, Rosendale, you know. And I've told people that this virus, right, attacks humans. You know, it doesn't attack, you know, you based on the color of your skin. You know, it will attack anybody. You know, it's very dangerous, very potent. You know, we have an opportunity. This is why the task and finish group that we want to form, hopefully, you know, we'll get volunteers, is so important, right, to actually inform the work, you know, give it that quality time it deserves, you know, provide this board with the correct ammunition, and I'll use the word ammunition, So then we can go and fire that ammunition in a nice, friendly way, to let board members, and even if we don't get the resources right, it gives us politicians that are leading this to actually go to our government, our political parties, and I'm not making any political points about this because it's a cross-party thing that I'm talking about, to change whichever government's in power to actually take this more seriously, change hearts and minds. This group is so important. And that's why, right, I've got a good bunch of people. I know you all more or less quite well. So I'm hoping that we actually get a flurry of volunteers going forward to take this work on. Because until we actually come forward and start to take proposals forward, we're not really going to make the impact that we want to make. So James and Ian, how do you want to play? Do you want some volunteers now, or do you want to get volunteers to email you? And I don't know, or if you people want to volunteer now, they can put their hand up, and we'll make a note of them. People say to me that you make a good salesman, Shabir. I say yes, but it's only if you're actually going to take from the rich and give to the poor. Robin Hood. Anyway, so James, over to you. How do you want to play?
Thanks, Chair. I'd be happy to receive any offers of help to sit on the task and finish. And then once I've received those, perhaps, should we say, by this time next week, I can then pick it up with yourself, Chair, and with Jackie to finalise the terms of reference and that membership.
Yeah, because see what is this task and finish group? If we can actually do something that actually is so obvious that it's actually really innovative, because usually the obvious stuff is the innovation, and I think that we've got the right skills and knowledge and talent in this board to actually come forward with something that is really, really, really concrete, really robust, and make it fly very, very quickly. The opportunity is there. The region is dying out for new ideas, right? And we've got the answers. I hope we've got the answers. So anyway, we'll take that on, and James will be in touch with you guys. Sorry, is there any more people who want to come in? I can't see any hands. Item 7, the good work standard. Who's going to introduce it? James, you again.
Oh, thanks, Chair. Again, just conscious of time. This is something which has come out of the economic recovery work. It's really about employers of whatever sector, third, private, public, and it's a proposal which has also been to the big panel for their views and supported in principle. So in summary, the Good Work Standard approach outlined in the papers about promoting inclusive business behaviours and productivity. So it's got a twin aim. In essence, it's fundamentally about inclusive growth. As outlined within the paper, far too many, unfortunately, of our employers in the city region, employees, are not actually in good work at the moment. In other words, in secure, high quality or well-paid work. And this sort of in-work poverty isn't just socially harmful, but we also know that it's a drag on productivity itself. So what the report does is to propose that at this stage we prepare some options for developing a fit-for-purpose good work standard. And we're fairly open-minded at the moment, happy to hear views, but this could be something which is off the shelf. So it's a generic model that exists already. Maybe the TUC's Great Jobs Agenda, we could base it on that. It could be borrowed from others. So there are other good work standards in existence, like in London, Greater Manchester, Liverpool City region and elsewhere. Or it could be entirely bespoke, or indeed it could be a hybrid of all three of those. So what we do feel is important as advice really for members to think about is that it really should be applicable to all sectors and sizes of organisation, not just a narrow focus on private sector or on bigger companies. So it should fit with SMEs as well. It should not, obviously, for clear reasons, conflict with other local approaches. So I think there's something in Leeds, perhaps Kirklees is thinking about developing its own good work charter as well, I think is in your recovery plan, and Chair, and that it covers a number of themes. I think without exception, it needs to focus on fair pay, strong workforce voice, health and welfare leadership, and clearly equality and diversity. So turning to the recommendations, it's really to seek the endorsement and the principle of establishing a good work standard for the region, and support the proposed next steps, which are at 2.9, and for officers to come back with worked up options that you can run through and debate as a panel.
Right, thank you, James. The report seems pretty straightforward, right? Yeah, and the standard is really, if you can standardize a lot of things, the world will be a better place. But yes, Kate, you get your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is really welcome. What I'd just like to stress, as the diversity champion, I would really like to focus on that diversity, equity and inclusion aspect of a good employment, and ensure that it's properly linked in with the whole package of research that is happening. I think it works really well, James, with the work we've already talked about across the diversity piece, and if those could be linked up, I think that would be really, really valuable. And I'm sure it would be part of it anyway, but certainly the living wage employer team, I'm sure, would be really happy to get involved as well.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
Any more? Mike?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I really welcome this idea. I think we as JOF have worked with several of the places that have developed employer charters over the last few years. So I think it's a good idea. I think one thing I'd encourage is you to go out and speak to officers in Greater Manchester and London in particular who've been developing this stuff, because actually there's a lot of really good insight and a lot of really good work which they have already done, and I think there are things that you can learn from them to avoid making the mistakes that they made, because actually there definitely has been dead ends that they've reached as a result, some of which actually relates directly to the living wage, Kate, because I think there is a tension here between sort of how much the real living wage can be brought into this versus other things, and how you balance the sort of quality of work versus pay, and the challenges of actually bringing employers along with you in this. And I think actually bringing employers with you in this journey towards a better standard of work is really important. It's not to say that living wage isn't important, it really is, but I think it's just recognising that. I think the only other thing to caution and to think through is how it might be positioned and sort of communicated about in the current context, given we are going to be entering a really big recession. There's going to be really high levels of unemployment. Getting the balance right, and it's something that we've been urging government to really think about, between job quantity and job quality is going to be really crucial. This is definitely a lever to sort of improve job quality, but you don't want to impact on job quantity at the same time as a result of this sort of thing. So it's just, I think this is the right thing to do. I really endorse it and support it. I think it's just about thinking through how this works in the current context.
Sam?
Would it be possible just for me to enhance what I was saying about
you can come in and then bring some in. Yeah, sure.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
I absolutely agree, Mike. It's not about living wage or costs or some kind of top-down imposition. Completely not. And in a sense, that maps also onto something that I didn't say, but I would have liked to, which is around the involvement of actually the community sector and good quality work within the third sector being also an issue, because quite often the kind of quality of work and pay there is also challenging, and so it's somehow finding a way to walk that tightrope between giving people jobs, but actually them being jobs that are worth having, and making sure that we get that balance right.
Thanks, Kate. Sam, did you want to come in?
Yes, please, Chair. Thank you. I just wanted to add my welcome to this suggestion. I think it's really important, and I think it's also really important that there's a health and well-being aspect that we're looking for employees as well. If you consider, I think it's 1 in 3 employees carries at least one long-term health condition, and if you think about the connection of that to productivity, and the fact that most of those people live in our poorest communities, then you can see how important that aspect of this proposal is in terms of the inclusive growth agenda. So really welcome that broad view around the health and well-being of our employees, and to build on what Kate said around the diversity and inclusion aspect of this. And we know, don't we, there's lots of evidence around that says that when we've got a diverse workforce, we make better decisions because they're better informed, and therefore we're more successful in business. So I don't think it's something that we're asking businesses to do just because it's the right thing. It is the right thing to do, and it will also be beneficial to our economies and to businesses as well.
Yeah, thanks, James. I've just noticed recommendations that there's going to be another progress report that will come to this panel meeting. And I think the comments I've made have been valid, right here. That we could come out with an ideal, but at the same time, we've got to have an air of realism with these private sector companies. So it'll be interesting to map out and monitor the progress and the changes it makes. So should we move on? Just bearing in mind the time is passing on as well. So item 8, strategic economic framework headline indicators. Who's taking this report, James? Peter Glover, I've got here. Peter, is he here or is it?
I'm here, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to attempt to share my screen now so you can see the slides. So yeah, it's just taking a while for the. So can people see the slide deck, yes. The economic framework slide deck? Okay, thank you. So the purpose of this item is to give the panel an opportunity to comment on the draft strategic economic framework indicators, and specifically those that relate to inclusive growth. So we're seeking your views on whether these are the right indicators. Is there anything obvious that's missing? Any that you feel are not relevant, and any that perhaps need further explanation. So you'll receive this appendix that I'm showing on the screen now, setting out the indicators, and that was accompanied by a paper from James providing the background. But just by way of introduction and recap, I'm assuming people are aware of the strategic economic framework, and that it will be replacing or is replacing the strategic economic plan. And that the CEF will bring together existing LEP and combined authority strategies, but it's intended to be flexible and agile. So there is scope to amend and expand the framework as new policies and strategies come on stream in what is a very volatile environment. To support the flexibility of the CEF, it's presented through a dynamic website rather than a single static document, and an initial version is already live. If people want to link to that, we'll be happy to share that. Now, the CEF will be underpinned by a monitoring and impact section to measure progress against the CEF priorities, and that's the focus of the discussion today. We've developed a set of 41 draft headline indicators structured around the 5 strategic priorities of the CEF. And one of these strategic priorities is about enabling inclusive growth. And we have 15 indicators that are specifically aligned to this priority. And you can see the first set of them there. In the pack, we've mapped them to the 4 inclusive growth goals of well-being, connectivity and accessibility, transferable and relevant skills, and good work, as you can see here. But it's important to note that inclusive growth is very much a cross-cutting element. It's very broad, and so many of the indicators under the other priorities have an inclusion dimension, an important inclusion dimension. So, for example, here under 21st century transport, we've got an indicator relating to relative accessibility of jobs from deprived communities via public transport, which obviously has a clear inclusion as well as transport dimension. And obviously connectivity and accessibility is central to inclusive growth. So in essence, we need to take quite a holistic approach to the indicators. if we're to achieve the vision of the CEF, then we need to make progress against all of the priorities, and inclusive growth actually extends to all of the 5 priorities under the CEF, although we have a discrete one around enabling inclusive growth. I should mention that the indicators have been reviewed by the Combined Authority and LEP boards, but that was on the understanding that there is scope for further development of them. In addition to the headline indicators that I mentioned, the 41 indicators, we're also developing supplementary indicators, again linked to the CEF priorities. And this reflects the fact that we have at least 16 defined policy areas sat beneath the priorities for which we need to measure progress. And this obviously can't be done via the headline indicators alone. So what we've done, already identified, is some supplementary indicators, and the ones relating to inclusive growth are also set out in the pack, again mapped to the 4 inclusive growth goals that already existed. So how will we communicate progress against the indicators? Well, first of all, we're developing a series of interactive dashboards which will be incorporated within the CEF website, linked to the relevant priorities and policy areas, and of course inclusive growth will be one of these. And we're also planning to produce a State of the Region report early next year to set out progress in detail and in a comprehensive way, and that should be a valuable resource for the Mayor when he takes office, as well as the wider range of stakeholders. So I'd like to open that to any sort of questions or
comments, observations. There's a lot of indicators.
there are, and they're primarily headline ones. So.
Yeah, but Jen? Jane, yes.
I mean, generally, they look fine, and I think it's important, following on a theme that Kate used earlier about not necessarily starting new streams of work, but actually using data that's easily obtainable, that's already accessible. And for our inclusive growth strategy, we've used some of the JRF indicators, and this echoes some of those. I just want you to further probe the issue that Kate raised on the previous paper in terms of health, in terms of people carrying more than one condition. And it's in there in terms of we're using life expectancy as a proxy to think about health. And notice later in the indicators, there's a reference to workforce health, percentage of workforce with X conditions. I just wondered if health should be given more prominence in our inclusive growth indicators, given what we were saying already in terms of well-being and ability to partake fully in life, in culture, in civic life, as well as in work.
So there's definitely scope to include more indicators around health, in line with the wellness goal, which is part of the inclusive growth framework. So we'd welcome any sort of suggestions. I think you're right in the point you make about availability of data. So we want to use data that is preferably readily accessible and is reliable for local areas. So obviously there's a whole host of health related indicators, but we definitely welcome the panel's input around indicators that they think we should prioritise, and there's scope to include that as part of the supplementary indicators, certainly. And if people feel there are key emissions, we could look to include them as a headline indicator.
And Yanis?
Just following on from the health thing, really, I mean, life expectancy is clearly really important, and it's the big one that we kind of track across society. Probably doesn't respond very quickly to changes in economic circumstances, and it probably doesn't really tell you much about the inclusivity aspect. So just really quickly, a few ideas. So some of the more sensitive indicators would be things like rates of mental health conditions, so depression or suicide. Infant mortality ratio is quite sensitive to maternal poverty, low birth weight, stuff like that. You might want something more like a measure of actual inequality. So something like the gap in healthy life expectancy from the top 10% to the lowest 10% deprived wards, or something along those lines. Just a few ideas for kind of potentially more appropriate indicators to track the health outcomes.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. So I'll take a few questions and you can come back in at the end. Peter O'Brien.
Thank you, Chair. Just I guess a question for Peter around the indicator on securing money and powers. Under that headline, it talks about net contribution of local area to the Exchequer. Clearly understand why that's in there. Long-term ambition for the region to be a net contributor, but that could take some period of time. It's kind of what would be the time scale of this, and also just to be slightly sort of careful. I think if you look at a city like London, that actually has a lot of public investment and has had a lot of public investment. Some of it might not necessarily be classed as regional public sector investment, but it's had a lot of public investment. So we've just got to be slightly sort of careful about the indicators about public investment, territorial public expenditure, where it goes, just so that West Yorkshire doesn't find itself in a position of inadvertently kind of giving a signal about public investment not necessarily mattering for West Yorkshire. I guess it's a comment more than a question, but if Peter wants to come back, that would be, really helpful.
Before Peter comes back, let me just say a few points and then we'll bring Mike. Did you got your hand up again?
Yeah, great, thanks, Chair. I think I've got sort of two broad points, one of which actually builds on Peter's, I think, which is to understand what the purpose of these indicators is. Because I think as a set of indicators which looks broadly across the state of the economy in West Yorkshire, I think they're fairly useful and fairly standard. However, I think what Peter's rightly identifies is that some indicators in there which are less about the state of the economy and more about measuring an ambition for what we think the economy should look like, rather than rather than actually just measuring the state of the economy as it is. So one of the questions was going to be about, are there any particular timescales on this? Understand a bit more about how these actually be used to monitor, and sort of thirdly, then how would you track the success of your interventions that you're making as a combined authority to deliver more inclusive growth against using some of the indicators? Because, for example, you could deliver a fantastic good work standard, you could deliver an amazing employment and skills plan and programme which delivers on all its aims, but make little impact on any of these headline indicators because of other external things like a big recession going on. So I think it's trying to understand what these will be used for, and then how you can ensure that there is another set of indicators which actually measure impact of interventions you're trying to make.
Thanks, Ian. And I've got Alex and then Cal. Alex.
Cheers, Chair. Yeah, I was accidentally clapping, thinking it was raising my hand, so I probably looked really enthusiastic about mental health indicators and various bits of statistics. I was just going to say, I think it's a good idea. I'll just take my hand off because it's distracting me. But I think it's a good idea to think about well-being and health indicators, etc. I was just wondering, a lot of local authorities will be doing the same as well. So obviously we've talked about a lot in Bradford with our Living Well campaign and things like that. So I just wonder if there's scope, if we're not careful, that we'll have one set of well-being indicators that we track through the LEP and WYCA, and then the 5 authorities or 6 authorities or however many all track slightly different things for their well-being, and just whether there's a bit of scope there, probably just to check in with the different authorities and how we track it, because that data might just feed straight up, or we have different data sets. So where's the consistency that might just create a bit more of an aligned approach? So supportive of the direction, and think maybe we just check in with the other authorities and make sure that we're not duplicating or running in different directions.
Thanks, Alex. Cal?
Yeah, to be honest, that links very well to my point, Chair, which is there's an opportunity then for ourselves then to have some coherence with the policing plans and the health, the health strategies across the sub-region, so that, we are actually all kind of you know, not working in different directions. Just picking up on Yanish's point, I think a key factor that I would suggest goes into the indicators, the headline indicators, is the issue of anxiety and stress within that whole notion of well-being, and how that then, you know, has an adverse effect on other health conditions, and then, you know, employment and jobs. So just to put that strong message around being coherent with other strategies and recognizing stress and anxiety, particularly in this COVID era, and linking across again to where some communities feel at more siege than others, and compounding then what we do know that exists in some of the deprived inner cities, that we have higher levels of mental health and illnesses than other communities.
Right, thanks. We need to move on. But very quickly, Peter, I think comments were made and they're all valid. I think one of the key things that, to me, as an indicator, is how long do I live? You know, and if I'm going to live 60, 70, 80, 90 years, and if someone kills me earlier, then that means that there'll be a health indicator that's had an impact on me. So I think that's a really strong message in terms of life expectancy. You know, and we've got examples of all that, haven't we? Not just at a national level, but at a local level, in terms of, you know, somebody living in one part of my ward lives 10 years, up to 10 years longer than somebody living in another part of the ward, right? Yeah, you know, and there's a whole lot of range of indicators there. And what that, you know, your recommendations that, you know, we're going to comment on this, we make some comments. But I think my view is we need to focus on what we're trying to achieve. And that needs to be the driver. And one of the things I fed back to the big panel, not the big panel, but the LEP board, was how do we act as a conduit, as a lever, to actually make sure the investment, that it goes in the right place. And I think the indicator is a really good way of actually monitoring, performance managing, and acting as a critical friend to everything else that goes on. So whatever we measure has got to have a direct impact on every single board. So say, for example, the climate thing, which we're going to talk about later on. Yeah, you know, air quality is a big issue, you know, because that impacts on, you know, health. So we need to get smarter in terms of, you know, there's no point in just measuring stuff, right? Yeah, and we talk about it, and you know, world carries on. You know, there needs to be something that comes out of that we can then hold the LEP board. I won't say to, well, maybe to account. You know, I don't know, but this is an ongoing piece of work. But we'll take everything on board, and the recommendations are very clear. We'll have a detailed dashboard that we'll go forward on. Item 9, employment and skills plan refresh. Sonia, do you want to introduce this, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I will just start sharing my screen.
Bearing in mind, we're now going over 5 minutes. And we've still
5 minutes, more, right.
Yeah, we've gone over our time, but no pressure.
Okay, thank you, Chair. In that case, then, I just wanted to share an overview of the Employment and Skills Plan refresh and some of the work that's being done by the Employment and Skills Panel and officers through consultation with various groups as well over the past few months. So panel members will be, has that slide moved on? Yeah. So panel members will be familiar with the existing plan, which has 3 key themes, which are in the yellow boxes across the middle of your screen there. There are also 2 cross-cutting themes around higher level skills and apprenticeships. And these are meant to address skills gaps and shortages in the 3 sectors that are in round circles at the bottom of that slide. And just to give you an idea of some of the feedback that we've had to date, is that broadly speaking, the themes that are highlighted on this slide are the right ones, but do need some revision. So to give you some examples, the one around raising the bar on high level skills, we'll have a focus on driving innovation and productivity through high level skills. The one next to it, the apprenticeship one, will have a broader focus on vocational and technical education. So it will look to include T-levels and traineeships. And then the 3 themes in yellow across the middle of the screen. Employability, accessing jobs and realising potential. We'll have a focus on adaptability, progression and resilience in good work, which I know this panel is keenly interested in. And building workforce skills will refocus to creating a culture of investment in workforce skills. So in the interest of time, you've had these slides in advance. So in terms of the current landscape and what we're already doing and what success will look like, I'll just skip over those slides because I'd like to share with you some information that we've had as a result of an online survey that we held that was targeted at members of the public that I think this panel will be interested in. So we had over 100 responses to our online survey of the existing skills plan. Around 45% of those were from individuals. And we asked a question specifically about what was important to support those from Black and minority ethnic communities to be successful in work. And the results of that, of the survey, are in front of you here. So broadly speaking, of the 113 people that responded to this, around 80% of those people felt that there were a range of strategies that would be useful, including mentoring in the workplace, representation of BAME communities on senior leadership teams, unconscious bias training, and then there was, fair to say, there's slightly less support for things like publishing pay gap data and signing up to some kind of charter mark. Alongside that question, we also offered a free text box, and the responses that we got broadly fall into three main categories. The first one around what we can do around what employers could do around recruitment practices. And then responses around what employers could do in the workplace. And then finally, policy approaches for local and combined authorities to consider. So I appreciate that I've raced through those slides at speed, and the ones at the end were new to you, so I'd be happy to circulate those to the panel. But I'd like to invite comments and questions on the things that we should include in the revised employment and skills plan from an inclusive growth perspective.
Right, thanks, Sonia. I've got Councillor Andrew Waller. Andrew, do you want to come in?
Yeah, it was just to come in on point 2.6 because I'm very keen that there isn't a hard border between West Yorkshire and the North Yorkshire area, and it does refer to the strategy having regard for programmes that are ongoing. It mentions European funding, which will need to be looked at for any gaps that emerge, but particularly in the New York and North Yorkshire area. So I'm just keen to flag that up as a general point that we do want to be able to work between the areas. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Mike Hawking, you got your hand up?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So just a couple of things. So one was given the sort of likely recession that we're going to have and the impact that we know it's going to have on unemployment, I think there's two elements that probably need to speak to perhaps a little bit more. One is about young people and reflecting on sort of actually the government's interventions already, how you make Kickstart really work for people who live in West Yorkshire. And the second is that I think one of the things that we're particularly concerned about at JRF is the number of people over 25 with fewer formal qualifications who may find themselves out of work. And I think there's some stuff in there around apprenticeships and retraining, but I wonder whether that could just be given a bit more emphasis, particularly given I think that's where some additional government spending may well be required or come from. And just finally, I think on your BAME sort of survey, I think it's really interesting to see what people think, but I would also be really interested to see what the evidence of what actually works is in terms of actually engaging BME communities or supporting more BME communities into decent work. We've certainly had a programme on that over the last over recent years, and can send you some details through. But I think it's also something that we are really keen to do some further work on. So I can speak to you about that afterwards as well, Sonia.
Thank you.
Yanish.
Thanks, Chair. Colleagues may or may not be aware on this call, but at the West Yorkshire and Harrogate Health and Care Partnership, we've just been doing a big review into health inequalities and outcomes for both Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities and staff in the health and care system. And I'm just going to put a link into the chat in case people haven't seen it. It's been quite a quick review with lots of people from local authorities, CCGs, public health, etc. We've collected quite a bit of data, including national and local data, looking at different aspects of these issues. And I think it's highly likely that one of the recommendations that emerges from that report is a really strong focus on educational attainment educational attainment for people from Black and Asian minority ethnic backgrounds, I should say. So I really support and welcome that focus.
Quickly, Anish? I don't mean to. It's just that we've got and this is the point I'm trying to make, that we've got a very important, from my point of view, presentation on unconscious biasness, and I want to make sure that we all share that and get. So if you've got a link, right, share it with us. If you want to send it to one of my officers, right, you can do. We'll share it on email as well. It's just that we just need to also manage how we manage the agenda in the future. With 10 items is quite a lot of items, especially when you've got an hour's unconscious biasness presentation training session. So have you made the point, Janice, you wanted to make? I think you were
yes,
talking about
I've put a link in the chat, support that work, and recommend that colleagues look more at the work of the review as it comes out.
Yeah, okay, sorry about that. Is there anybody else that wants to comment or make any recommendations, talk on the recommendations? Do you want to come back, Sonia, on the points that have been raised?
I think most of them, I'm more than happy to link up with Yanish and Mark after the meeting and pick up on some of the research that they're coming up with. I think will be useful for the development. Right,
thanks. Item 10, the report's there, and basically what each panel is doing is asking for champions. And we heard that Kate's our equality and diversity champion, right? Yes, so she's already volunteered to be a champion for one of the items that we're trying to address. What this report is asking for is to have a green economy champion. Simon Pringle, who chairs the board, had asked for a champion to move forward. The recommendations is very clear that the panel endorses the appointment of inclusive growth champions to all panels. So that's the first point, and seeks nominations for this. And we're looking at a green economy champion. So this is just there to actually action. I don't think there's anything that really we need to discuss about. It's just something that we need to do. So if you've got any champions wanting to come forward, let James know, and we'll then feed that back. Okay, thank you very much. Right, that brings on. That's now end of the public part of the meeting.